Welcome to another miraculous edition of the Corey Margera Show. I'm your host, your Lord and Savior of Eternal Coolness, Corey Margera. And in this episode, I'm going to talk about the Nintendo Gamecube and why I thought it was absolutely 100% underrated as fuck. Like, serious, this console was just awesome. I don't really compliment it as much as I do the SNES and the N64, but this console is just as good. There's a lot of really great things about the GameCube. And the reason I don't really talk about it as much as the other two consoles, the SNES and the N64, is because, in all honesty, as good as it is, it did not divert my attention from the PS2. It really didn't. I honestly enjoyed the PS2 much more than this system, but, well, not much more, but more than this system, more than the GameCube. And I love the GameCube too. I love the system. There's a lot of people that think, oh, I don't like the GameCube, and I thought that Nintendo went downhill during this era. And in some ways they did, some ways they didn't, some ways they were just as good. To me, Nintendo did kind of go downhill during this era as far as, basically, how can I put it? Sales and stuff like that. As far as mainstream attention. I mean, until I came on YouTube and found out about how many people love the GameCube on the internet, I did not know that this system, was loved and appreciated as much as it deserves to be. But, the thing about the GameCube is, while it is underrated and while I do enjoy this system a lot, and this is not my GameCube, by the way. This is not my GameCube. This is actually a picture that I got off of Google. I just Google imaged it because my GameCube is actually in my room somewhere, but I don't know where I put it. I think it might be put away in the closet or something like that. I honestly am too lazy to go and try to find it and take a picture of it. One of these days when I do clean up my room, one day I have to clean this mess up and hook my GameCube back up to my TV and play it. But, that's going to be when I get some more free time and stuff like that. I just really wanted to basically, say that while I do love this system, it didn't divert my attention away from the PS2 like the N64 did with the PS1 and even the SNES did with the Sega Genesis. Those two consoles diverted me from the competition. I was more interested in the SNES than I was with the Genesis, aside from a few games like Sonic, of course, Streets of Rage, Vector Man, Shinobi, and stuff like that. I did think that the Super NES was just a far superior console in so many other ways. Better exclusives, from Super Metroid to Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the Fighting Edition, which was one of my favorite fighting games next to Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat 2 at the time. As well as just so many great games from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 4, Turtles in Time. Just a bunch of really cool games from the SNES. Super Metroid, did I mention that already? I love that game. Super Mario World, Super Mario All-Stars, the Mega Man X games. I love those games. I remember me and my friend, we used to be huge Mega Man X fans, back as kids and stuff like that. Donkey Kong Country. The SNES, diverted my attention away from the Genesis in a lot of ways, even though I love the Sega Genesis. And the N64, I already told you that story a million times. So if you're long-term listeners to my channel, you know that the I thought the N64 was just completely 100% better than the PlayStation 1. But the GameCube did not divert my attention away from the PS2. And one of the reasons, though, is because it didn't have a really good wrestling game. I was dying for a really good wrestling game on the GameCube, and the best we ever got on the GameCube, wrestling game wise, was Day of Reckoning. Now the PlayStation 2, and this came during a time, before I continue, this came during a time where wrestling was still awesome. You know, it's not like the PG era today. You know, um, it was during when the GameCube was popular. Well, I don't think it was really popular compared to the PS2 and Xbox mainstream wise, but when it was like out on the market and like popular, it was Nintendo's main home console. You know, the invasion angle, the alliance angle, the ruthless aggression era, you know, that was all going on. So wrestling was still pretty good. It was really fucking. I mean, I personally I love wrestling. I used to love wrestling, and you know, it was just during the time the GameCube was out, wrestling was still really fucking good. But there weren't that many great wrestling games for the GameCube. Um, WrestleMania 19 was okay. WrestleMania 18 sucked. I'm sorry, that game sucked. You know, Day of Reckoning was okay. Day of Reckoning 2 was, it's okay. It really, I mean, I just remember when I played Day of Reckoning 2, I just ignored it for SmackDown versus Raw 2006 for the PS2. I just completely ignored it that year. But, you know, that was one of my biggest gripes. Like, GameCube did not have that many good wrestling games compared to the PS2 and even the N64. The N64 had way better wrestling games than the GameCube did. But, you know, that was just a huge, you know, big thing for me because I was a huge wrestling fan at the time, you know, and the PS2 just had way better wrestling games. And, you know, but, you know, and also on that note as well, one of the reasons why I loved the N64 so much previously was because of Rare. And Rare was known for excellent games, from Conker's Bad Fur Day to GoldenEye, the original GoldenEye game, to Perfect Dark, to Killer Instinct. And Rare was gone. Rare was supposed to be on the GameCube. They were supposed to make Perfect Dark Zero for the GameCube, but they never did, and it eventually became a shitty Xbox 360 game. Well, not shitty, but a mediocre Xbox 360 game. And, you know, it just, you know, it was just like one of those things. 'Cause I remember when the GameCube was first announced, they were announcing Perfect Dark Zero, which was supposed to be a sequel to Perfect Dark on the N64. You know, they were announcing Super Smash Bros. Melee, which is still one of my favorite games ever. I love Super Smash Bros. Melee. And let me talk about some of the games for the GameCube. First of all, let's stop talking about the negative stuff that I didn't like. The GameCube just, technically speaking, had better graphics than the PS2. Hands down. It was just a better, more powerful machine than the PS2, but had better graphics than the PS2. Um, you know, the games were just amazing. It had 4 controller ports, just like the N64, so there's no complaints there. My biggest problem with the GameCube, though, one thing that really pissed me off was the memory cards kept corrupting. I had like 2 GameCube memory cards, and none of them were third party, by the way. I didn't have any shitty third party GameCube memory cards. I had official Nintendo licensed memory cards for the GameCube. Um, but they kept fucking corrupting. And dude, let me tell you, I had like so many saved games in like Dragon Ball Z Budokai 2. I had Beautiful Joe. I had Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, Super Smash Bros. Melee. I unlocked so much shit in that game. Mario Kart Double Dash was my favorite Mario Kart game ever. That is the best. This is not up for debate. This is not an opinion here. This is a fact. Mario Kart Double Dash is the best Mario Kart game ever made. Period. You know, so far anyway. I have yet to play Mario Kart 8, but that looks really good too. But I don't think anything is going to top Double Dash. Double Dash was just amazing. I love Double Dash. But I'm going to eventually have to get a Wii U and find out about some of these great games for the Wii U. But the GameCube just, I mean, it had the best port of Sonic Adventure 2. It was way better than the Dreamcast port. The graphics were a little better. You know, the multiplayer was way better than the Dreamcast version. The Dreamcast version's multiplayer was nowhere near as good as the GameCube's multiplayer in Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. So yeah, it had the best version of Sonic Adventure 2 Battle. Had the best version of Dragon Ball Z Budokai 2. It was better than the PS2 version. And I was kind of surprised too that the GameCube didn't get Budokai 3. But that was, I guess, by the time, because that was like a kind of a tradition for a while there. Um, a year later, the GameCube would get a Dragon Ball Z game after the PS2 had got it, because Budokai 2 came out in 2004. At the same time, Budokai 3 came out for the PS2, and I guess they didn't want to make a Budokai 3 version for the GameCube for whatever reason. I don't know. Um, but yeah, that's Budokai 3 is my favorite Dragon Ball Z game of all time. But Budokai 2 is better on the GameCube than it was for the PS2. I don't care what anyone says. The graphics were better. The controls were great. Dragon Ball Z. Mortal Kombat Deception for the GameCube was better than the PS2 and the Xbox versions. You had Goro, you had Shao Kahn, the roster was incredible. Um, Definitely better than Deception for the PS2. Um, Even I have Soul Calibur 2 for the PS2 as well. The GameCube version was better in my opinion, simply just because it had Link and not Hayachi, and Link was just a way better character. I am not a Zelda fan, by the way, so before people start saying, "Oh, you like Zelda?" No, I'm not. I'm not a Zelda fan, but I do think Link is way better and fits in Soul Calibur way more than Hayachi does. But I think that the original Xbox had the best version of Soul Calibur 2 because Spawn was my favorite. But I'll get to that later, another time. But yeah, the GameCube had so many great versions of so many games. It had Resident Evil Zero, which is my favorite old school Resident Evil game. I do consider it old school because it still had the gameplay and the controls like the older Resident Evil games. But the GameCube, man, it was just like a powerhouse. It had the best graphics. I didn't even get to the Metroid Prime games either. The Metroid Prime games were excellent, and this goes as far to tell you, like, if GameCube had better wrestling games, and Rare was still with Nintendo, the GameCube would have been even better than what it was, and it was already an amazing console in its own right. But it would have been better than what it was, honestly. And probably would have been, in my opinion, just as good as the PS2 had it had those better wrestling games. If it would have had a really good port of Budokai 3, and just like Budokai 2 was for the GameCube, and it would have had like Rare making a Perfect Dark 2 game, or Perfect Dark Zero for the GameCube, or a new Killer Instinct title for the GameCube, or a sequel to Conquerors for the GameCube, or Banjo Kazooie, or something like that. That would have been really fucking awesome. That would have been really fucking awesome. But, things didn't turn out that way, thanks to Microsoft. But, the GameCube in its own right, man, it was just an amazing console. I definitely enjoy it. I think it's fucking awesome. It's definitely it's very underrated. It's a very underrated console. The controller was excellent. The controller was very comfortable. One of the probably my favorite controller next to the PS2 DualShock. And I just love the GameCube controller. It's very comfortable, very easy to use. Um, what else can I say about the GameCube? Um, the silver edition was the best model. I did not like the original purple model. The black model was better, but still, like, every other console was black. The PS2, the original Xbox, and even the Sega Sports Edition of the Dreamcast was black. So I was kind of like, shit, dude. Like, can there be a console in another color aside from fucking black? That was just my personal preference. I don't care what anyone says. But the GameCube, I love the Platinum Edition, the Silver GameCube, the Platinum GameCube is the best model, and this is the only picture I could really find of the Platinum GameCube. Well, there's actually a few others, but they're in bad quality on Google, and that's why one of the reasons why I wanted to use this picture specifically, because it's just such a good looking console. As far as the silver model, the purple model looked kind of gay. The black model was okay, but nothing special. This is the best looking version of the GameCube, the silver, platinum, whatever you want to call it model. This is the best looking version of the GameCube. I don't care what anyone says. It is the best looking version of the GameCube. And it's such a great console. Let me talk about the Game Boy players as well. The Game Boy player was fucking awesome. That thing was sweet. I used to love the Game Boy Advance. A lot of the games from Sonic Advance to the Mega Man Zero titles to Dragon Ball Z Super Sonic Warriors to the Final Fight 1 remake. There was just a lot of really cool games for the Game Boy Advance, and it was just really cool to have a Game Boy player so you could basically play it on your TV. And it was fucking sweet. I mean, I love the Game Boy player. This console is definitely the probably my second favorite console of the sixth generation after the PS2. Because the PS2 is still my favorite. It just had overall it just had games that suited me more. But the GameCube was just amazing. And had it not have been, had Rare stayed with Nintendo, had Microsoft not have gotten involved into the console business, this could have been a really good fight between the PS2 and the GameCube. This could have been a really good war. I'm pretty sure the PS2 still would have won. But, I really, it's just, it really, like, the PS2 and the GameCube were just, like, my two favorite, and the Dreamcast are just, like, my two and three favorite consoles of the sixth generation. Um, but this and the PS2 are just addictive as fuck. Like, there's so many games for both this and the PS2. This system is just completely underrated. It deserves a lot more credit than it got during the early 2000s. It was a shame that this console didn't sell well compared to like the N64 and the SNES. And it's just such a really cool console. It has fast loading times. That's another great thing about it. Like, yeah, there are loading times now because the GameCube was the first Nintendo home console to have a disc drive in it, to have where it was disc based. You had the little mini disc, but the games were like fast loading. Like, it didn't take a long time for a game to load on this thing at all. I can't even remember any games that had long loading times for the GameCube, because all of them had like fast loading times. Almost every game had fast loading times. But I mean, this system was just amazing. It was just really cool, very powerful. I still do prefer the PS2 over the GameCube, but I do love the GameCube. This is probably the most underrated Nintendo home console ever. Probably the most underrated. Because I hear a lot of people talk about the N64. I hear a lot, even though the N64 gets a lot of hate from Sony fanboys and people who think that it should have had more third-party exclusives and stuff like that. But I hear people talk about the N64. I hear people talk about obviously the SNES. That's probably Nintendo's, in a lot of people's minds, including myself. That's probably Nintendo's best home console of all time. The original NES, which saved the video game industry. The Wii, which was extremely popular for all the wrong reasons, be it I hated the motion controls on the Wii. Was not a huge fan of the Wii. But out of all those consoles, except for maybe the Wii U and the Virtual Boy, this console was just, the Virtual Boy, of course, deserved to be hated too, by the way, because it was a piece of shit. But aside from the Wii U, this is definitely the most underrated Nintendo console ever. Like, this console is just amazing. It deserves a lot more praise than it got. Excellent graphics, excellent games, great ports of a lot of great games. In my opinion, particularly Mortal Kombat Deception, Dragon Ball Z Budokai 2, and Sonic Adventure 2 Battle were way better on the GameCube than they were for the PS2 and Dreamcast. So, it's just a lot of really cool games for this thing. It's a great multiplayer system. So many great times playing Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, Super Smash Bros. Melee, Mario Kart Double Dash, my fucking cousin cheating like a bastard in that game with the blue shell. Oh my god, I hate playing my cousin in Mario Kart Double Dash and Super Smash Bros. Melee because he's such a cheap bastard. He is. But that's another story entirely. But this thing is just amazing. The GameCube was just so good. Again, not as good as the PS2, but it was great. It was the PS2 was just so it was just I in my opinion it was just too good for what it was. But I mean, if you owned a PS2 and a Nintendo GameCube during the sixth generation, or if hell, if you still do, then you definitely did not get bored at all. You couldn't get bored. How could you get bored? There's no way you could have got bored unless you got them when they first came out. But hell, even the GameCube had an amazing launch compared to the PS2's launch. But that's just my opinion. That's just my take on it. What do you think? What do you think about the GameCube? Do you think it was underrated like me? Do you think it was a great system? What's your favorite console of all time? How do you remember the GameCube? Leave a comment. Make a video response to it. Whatever, all that's good stuff. But yeah, I love the GameCube. This system was just fucking awesome. And that's pretty much it, guys. Hope you enjoyed the video. And leave a comment, rate, subscribe, all that good shit. And I'll see you later.